The old warship hung in space like a tired warrior refusing to lay down his sword. Its hull, scarred from 3 decades of service, still gleamed under the distant sunlight. The U.S. Defiant was the last of her kind, a nuclear-powered vessel in an age of antimatter drives and quantum engines. Captain James Miller stood at the observation deck of the orbital station, his weathered hands clasped behind his back as he watched his ship. Tomorrow, they would start taking her apart. The order had come down from Fleet Command. Decommission the outdated vessel and sell her for scrap. The thought made his stomach turn. Still brooding, Captain. A friendly voice broke through his thoughts. Miller turned to find Admiral Peters walking toward him, her pristine white uniform a stark contrast to the practical black duty uniform he wore. "Just saying goodbye," Miller replied, turning back to the window. 30 years of service, and they're going to tear her apart like she's nothing. The Admiral stood beside him, her reflection showing in the reinforced glass. "Times change, James. The new Stellar-class ships can outrun, outgun, and outmaneuver anything we had in the past. Progress marches on." Miller's jaw tightened. Those fancy new ships break down if someone looks at them wrong. The Defiance never failed us. Not once. The maintenance costs alone, Peters began, are nothing compared to what we spend recalibrating antimatter containment fields every 6 months, Miller cut in. He'd had this argument too many times in the past year. "She's reliable, Admiral. In 30 years, we've never had a critical system failure. Can your new ships say the same?" Peters sighed. "The decision's been made, James. I'm sorry." Before Miller could respond, a young officer burst onto the observation deck, his face flushed from running. "Captain, Admiral, you need to see this." They followed the officer to the station's command center. The large room hummed with activity, officers and technicians moving between stations with purpose. Lieutenant Robert Kane, the station's sensor officer, waved them over to his console. "We picked this up 20 minutes ago," Kane said, pulling up a display. "It's like nothing I've ever seen." Miller leaned in, studying the readout. A strange signal pulsed across the screen, its pattern unlike anything in their database. "Where's it coming from?" "That's the thing," Kane replied, bringing up a star chart. "It's coming from the edge of the Kuiper Belt, but here's where it gets weird. None of our modern sensors can get a clear reading. They're too sensitive, too advanced. The signal keeps overwhelming them." "Then how did you detect it?" Peters asked. Kane smiled. "Pure luck. I was running a diagnostic on some old equipment. The Defiant's primary sensor array was still linked to our systems. Its older, more robust technology could handle the signal without overloading." Miller felt a familiar warmth in his chest. Even now, his old ship was proving her worth. "Have you been able to decode it?" "Working on it," Kane said, fingers flying over his console. "The pattern suggests it's artificial. Definitely not natural background radiation or stellar phenomena." Admiral Peters leaned over the console, her earlier dismissiveness forgotten. "Could it be first contact?" "If it is," Miller said, "we need to know more. And right now, the only ship with sensors that can study this signal is scheduled for the scrapyard." Peters met his eyes, understanding passing between them. She straightened up, smoothing her uniform. "I'll make some calls." "But James," she fixed him with a stern look, "don't get your hopes up. This might be nothing." Miller nodded, but inside, his mind was already racing. He knew his ship, knew what she could do. If there was something out there, something that their modern technology couldn't handle, the Defiant might be their only option. The next 12 hours passed in a blur of activity. The decommissioning orders were temporarily suspended, and Miller watched with satisfaction as his crew returned to the ship. They were a mix of veterans who'd served with him for years and younger officers who'd been assigned to the Defiant as their first posting. Many in the fleet saw assignment to the old nuclear-powered vessel as a career dead end, but Miller had always sought out officers who could appreciate the ship's reliability and heritage. Engineer Mary Watson met him at the airlock, her gray hair tied back in a practical bun. She'd been with the ship almost as long as he had. "Everything's just as we left it, Captain. Old girl's ready to go whenever you give the word." Miller smiled. "Good. Get the reactor warmed up. I have a feeling we'll be needing it soon." As they made their way to the bridge, Miller could feel the ship coming alive around them. The steady thrum of the nuclear reactor, the soft hiss of the air recyclers, the subtle vibration in the deck plates, all sounds that modern ships had engineered away, deemed too primitive for the current age. But to Miller, they were the heartbeat of a trusted friend. The bridge was already staffed when he arrived. Lieutenant Kane had transferred over from the station, bringing his expertise with the signal. He sat at the sensor station, working with the ship's science officer, David Walker, to analyze the mysterious transmission. "Report," Miller ordered, settling into his command chair. "Signal's still there, sir," Kane replied. "Getting stronger, actually. Whatever it is, it's moving into the solar system." Walker looked up from his station, his young face serious. "Captain, I'm detecting some unusual patterns in the signal. It's changing, like it's reacting to our attempts to scan it." Miller frowned. In his experience, anything that could adapt and react was potentially dangerous. "Keep monitoring it." "Mary, how's our power?" "Reactors at optimal levels, sir," Watson's voice came over the comm. "We've got full power to all systems." Just then, Admiral Peters' voice came through the bridge speakers. "Captain Miller, we're picking up something new. Multiple objects just appeared at the edge of our sensor range. They're big, and they're moving fast." The main screen lit up with sensor data. Dozens of objects, each larger than any ship in Earth's fleet, were heading toward the inner solar system. Their design was like nothing he'd ever seen, all sweeping curves and strange geometries that seemed to hurt his eyes if he looked at them too long. "Sir," Kane called out, his voice tense, "the signal, it's changed. It's broadcasting on all frequencies now. I think," he paused, double-checking his readings, "I think it's a message." The bridge fell silent as garbled sounds filled the speakers, slowly resolving into recognizable words through the ship's old but reliable translation matrix. "Obsolete beings. Primitive technology. Your existence offends us. Prepare for extinction." Miller's hands gripped his armrests as he watched more ships appear on the screen. Humanity's first contact with alien life, and it was anything but peaceful. He could already imagine the panic spreading through the fleet as the news reached Earth. But as he sat there, watching the alien armada approach on his ship's primitive sensors, a plan began to form in his mind. The aliens had called them obsolete, primitive. Maybe that would be their advantage. "Send word to Fleet Command," he ordered, his voice steady. "The U.S. Defiant stands ready to defend Earth. And someone tell Admiral Peters." He allowed himself a small smile. She might want to hold off on those decommissioning orders. The old warship hung in space, its nuclear heart beating strong and steady as it prepared to face an enemy that saw it as nothing more than an outdated relic. But Captain Miller knew better. Sometimes, the old ways were the best ways. And before this was over, he would prove just how dangerous obsolete technology could be. Miller straightened in his chair. "Show me." The alien ships moved through space like dark clouds before a storm. Earth's defense fleet scrambled to respond, their antimatter drives pushing them to speeds the old Defiant could never match. Captain Miller watched from his bridge as the sleek modern vessels took up defensive positions, their quantum shields humming with enough power to stop a small moon. "Quite a show they're putting on," Engineer Watson commented over the comm. She'd been monitoring the energy readings from engineering. All those fancy ships burning fuel like there's no tomorrow. Miller nodded, though she couldn't see him. The new ships were impressive, he had to admit. Each one carried enough firepower to level a continent. But something about this situation made him uneasy. It seemed too easy, too straightforward. "Lieutenant Kane, any changes in the alien signal?" he asked. No, sir. Still broadcasting the same message. But, Kane paused, adjusting something on his console. There's something else buried in the transmission. Some kind of carrier wave that our old systems can detect, but the modern sensors seem to miss completely. Before Miller could respond, the main screen lit up with a priority transmission from Fleet Command. Admiral Peters appeared, her face tense. Captain, we're picking up massive energy buildups from the alien fleet. They're preparing to engage. All ships are ordered to battle stations. Understood, Admiral. What are our orders? Stay back and observe, Peters replied. Your ship's too valuable to risk in direct combat. Miller wanted to argue, but he held his tongue. Something still felt wrong about this whole situation. Acknowledged. Defiant will maintain safe distance and monitor the situation. The screen went dark, and Miller turned to his crew. Battle stations. I want everyone ready for anything. The aliens struck first. Strange energy pulses rippled out from their ships, beautiful and terrible at the same time. The Earth fleet responded immediately, their advanced weapons lighting up space with destructive power. For a moment, it seemed like humanity's superior technology would carry the day. Then everything went wrong. Captain, Kane called out, his voice urgent. That carrier wave I detected, it's changing. The energy pattern is. He never finished his sentence. The alien pulses reached the Earth fleet, and suddenly every antimatter-powered ship went dark. Their quantum shields flickered and died. Their weapons fell silent. Even their communication systems went dead. My God, Miller whispered, watching Earth's mighty fleet drift helplessly in space. They knew. They knew exactly how to disable our technology. Sir, Watson's voice came through, steady despite the crisis. I'm analyzing the alien weapon. It's some kind of quantum disruption field. It's targeting the antimatter containment system specifically. But our nuclear reactor. She paused, and Miller could hear the smile in her voice. It's completely unaffected. Miller leaned forward in his chair. Because we're too primitive. Their weapon was designed to disable advanced technology. They never bothered to account for nuclear power. The bridge crew exchanged looks as the implications sank in. The Defiant, the ship they'd been about to scrap, was now the only working warship in Earth's fleet. Sir, Walker called from his science station. The alien ships are moving toward Earth. At their current speed, they'll be in weapons range of the planet in 6 hours. Miller stood up, his decision made. Get me Fleet Command. And someone wake up our weapons officer. I want to know exactly how many nuclear torpedoes we have in storage. The next hour was chaos. With most of the fleet's communication systems down, coordinating a response proved challenging. But the Defiant's old radio systems still worked perfectly, allowing them to relay messages between the disabled ships and Earth. Admiral Peters, now operating from a ground station, appeared on their screen again. James, I hope you have good news. We're getting reports of global panic. Our ground-based defenses are preparing for invasion. But without the fleet, we can fight, Miller interrupted. The Defiant systems are fully operational, and I have an idea, but you're not going to like it. He explained his plan. The Defiant would use its immunity to the alien weapon to get close to their fleet. Their old-style nuclear torpedoes, guided by simple computer systems the aliens couldn't disable, might be able to penetrate their defenses. It's a suicide mission, Peters said flatly. Maybe, Miller agreed. But right now, we're the only ship that can fight back. And I'm not about to let those aliens call us primitive while they destroy our world. There was a long pause before Peters nodded. Do it. And James, good hunting. The Defiant's nuclear reactor hummed to life as they prepared for battle. Watson had coaxed every bit of power she could from the old systems. They wouldn't be as fast as the alien ships, but they had something better. They were unpredictable. Ready on my mark, Miller ordered, watching the alien fleet grow larger on their screen. Lieutenant Kane, keep monitoring their signals. Walker, I want continuous scans of their shield frequencies. Watson, give us everything you can from the reactor." The crew responded with quiet determination. They all knew the stakes. They all knew the odds. But they also knew that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. "Sir," Kane called out suddenly, "I'm detecting power fluctuations in the alien fleet. Their energy weapons are charging." "Hold course," Miller ordered. "Watson, how's our radiation shielding?" "Old-style lead and water shields, Captain. Simple, reliable, and working perfectly." The alien weapons fired, filling space with deadly energy. But the Defiant's thick armor and basic shielding held. Their simple systems had no quantum fields to disrupt, no complex algorithms to corrupt. They just absorbed or deflected the energy the old-fashioned way. "They're adjusting their attack pattern," Walker reported, "moving to surround us." Miller smiled grimly. "Just as expected. Helm, execute maneuver Delta 7. The Defiant turned sharply, its nuclear engines pushing it through a series of evasive maneuvers that would have seemed clumsy to modern pilots. But there was wisdom in those old patterns, developed over centuries of warfare. While the alien ships moved with impossible grace, the Defiant's motions were unpredictable, almost erratic. "First torpedoes spread ready," the weapons officer reported. "Target their lead ship," Miller ordered. "Let's show them what primitive technology can do." The nuclear torpedoes launched, their simple rocket engines carrying them toward their target. The aliens' advanced defensive systems, calibrated to stop quantum weapons and energy beams, struggled to track the relatively slow-moving projectiles. The first torpedo struck home. A massive explosion lit up space as the nuclear warhead detonated against the alien ship's hull. When the light faded, the enemy vessel was spinning, its sleek surface marred by a massive crater. "Direct hit," Kane shouted. "Their shields, they weren't designed to stop kinetic weapons." But there was no time to celebrate. The alien fleet was responding, their weapons becoming more focused, more dangerous. The Defiant shuddered as energy beams struck its hull. "Hull plating holding at 60%, Watson reported. "But we can't take too many more hits like that." Miller gripped his chair as another blast rocked the ship. They'd bloodied the alien's nose, proved they weren't as primitive as their enemies thought. But now came the hard part, surviving long enough to make a difference. "Prepare second torpedo spread," he ordered, "and get me fleet command. Tell them to ready every nuclear weapon we have planetside. We've proved these bastards can be hurt. Now we just have to figure out how to hurt them enough to make them leave." The Defiant turned to face the alien fleet again, its old engines growling with power. They were one ship against many, obsolete technology, against the most advanced weapons in the galaxy. But they had something the aliens didn't understand: the strength that comes from simplicity, and the power of a crew fighting for their home. The real battle was about to begin. Smoke filled the Defiant's bridge as damage control teams rushed to repair what they could. They had been fighting for 6 hours straight, using hit-and-run tactics against the alien fleet. 3 enemy ships now drifted in space, their hulls broken by nuclear fire, but the Defiant had taken heavy damage in return. "Status report," Miller called out, wiping sweat from his forehead. The environmental controls were failing, making the bridge feel like an oven. "Hull breaches on decks 3 and 4, Watson reported from engineering. "We've sealed them off. Reactors still holding steady, but we're down to 40% power. Weapons. 8 nuclear torpedoes remaining," the weapons officer replied. "All conventional missiles are spent." Miller nodded grimly. They'd hurt the aliens, proved they weren't helpless, but they couldn't keep this up forever. Sooner or later, their luck would run out. "Sir," Kane's excited voice cut through the gloom. "I found something in their communications, the old radar system. It's picking up their ships even when they're trying to hide." Miller turned to his sensor officer. "Explain." "Their cloaking technology works by bending quantum fields around their ships," Kane said, fingers flying over his console. "Modern sensors can't detect them because they're looking for the wrong things. But our old radar, it's so simple it sees right through their tricks. Walker jumped in from his science station. He's right, Captain. Their technology is too advanced for its own good. They've forgotten about basic physics in their rush to use quantum mechanics for everything. A plan began to form in Miller's mind. Watson, can you boost power to the radar systems? Already on it, sir. Rerouting power from non-essential systems now. The main screen flickered to life, showing a clear view of the battlefield. Hidden alien ships appeared as bright dots on the radar display, their positions revealed by technology they had dismissed as primitive. Send this data to Earth, Miller ordered. Every old radar installation we have needs to be activated. And get me Admiral Peters. The Admiral's face appeared on screen moments later. She looked tired but determined. Captain, we've received your radar data. Ground forces are already using it to track the alien fleet. Good. But we need more than that. The Defiant can't keep fighting alone. Peters nodded. Agreed. We've been working on something. Those disabled ships in orbit, we're retrofitting them with nuclear power cores from our old submarine fleet. It's not pretty, but it should get them moving again. Miller allowed himself a small smile. Trust humans to find a way to make old technology work in new ways. How long until they're operational? First ship should be ready in 3 hours. But James, Peters paused. We're detecting more alien ships entering the system. A lot more. The news hit like a physical blow. They'd barely survived against the first wave. How could they face reinforcements? Suddenly, Watson's voice cut through the silence. Captain, get down to engineering. There's something you need to see. Miller found his chief engineer standing next to the ship's massive nuclear reactor, a strange look on her face. What is it? Been studying the alien weapon, she said, pointing to a display. The way it disrupts quantum fields, it's not just affecting our antimatter drives. It's making their own systems unstable too. They have to maintain perfect quantum coherence for their technology to work. And? Watson smiled. And our reactor puts out a lot of electromagnetic interference. Nothing dangerous by our standards. We built our systems to handle it. But their quantum tech, it's like fingernails on a chalkboard to them. That's why they've been staying at a distance. Miller's eyes widened as he understood. If we could generate a strong enough electromagnetic pulse, we could disrupt every quantum system in range, Watson finished. Their weapons, their shields, their engines, everything would fail at once. Can we do it? Watson's smile faded slightly. Maybe. But we have to push the reactor way past safety limits. And we'd need to get close, really close, to their command ship. Miller thought about his crew, about Earth waiting below, about all the people counting on them. How long do you need? Give me 2 hours to modify the reactor shielding. After that, it's all or nothing. The next 2 hours were a blur of activity. The Defiant played a deadly game of cat and mouse with the alien fleet, using their radar advantage to stay one step ahead while Watson and her team worked on the reactor. Kane discovered he could use the old radar systems to detect patterns in the alien fleet's movements. Walker figured out that their weapons worked best just after they fired, when the quantum fields were most unstable. Every small advantage they found helped them survive a little longer. Finally, Watson's voice came over the comm. Ready, Captain. But I should warn you, this could fry every electronic system we have. Even if it works, we might not survive it. Understood. Miller turned to his crew. This is it. One way or another, we're about to show these aliens why you should never underestimate primitive technology. All hands, battle stations. The Defiant turned toward the alien command ship, its nuclear engines burning hot. The enemy responded immediately, energy weapons lighting up space around them. Hull plating failing. Reactor temperature rising. Multiple hull breaches. The damage reports came fast and furious as they pushed forward. Miller gripped his chair, watching the distance counter tick down. They needed to get closer, just a little closer. They're surrounding us, Kane reported, his voice steady despite the chaos. "Hold course," Miller ordered. "Watson, stand by for reactor overload." The ship shuddered as another hit struck home. Warning sirens blared throughout the vessel. On the screen, Miller could see the alien command ship growing larger, its impossible geometry seeming to mock their simple, human design. In range, Walker called out. Miller took a deep breath. "Watson, do it." The lights flickered as Watson diverted all power to the reactor. The mighty nuclear core, built decades ago by engineers who believed in making things to last, began to roar. Reactor at 150% capacity. Hull temperature critical. Alien ships closing in. Miller watched the enemy vessels move in for the kill, their weapons charged for a final blow. Just a few more seconds. "Now," Watson yelled. The Defiance reactor screamed as it released its power, not as heat or thrust, but as a massive electromagnetic pulse. The wave of energy spread out in all directions, invisible but unstoppable. For a moment, nothing seemed to happen. Then, one by one, the alien ships began to die. Their quantum fields collapsed, their weapons went dark, their impossible geometries became simple, lifeless hulls. The command ship lasted longest, its advanced systems fighting against the pulse. But in the end, even it succumbed, its lights flickering out like a candle in the wind. On the Defiance bridge, emergency lights cast a red glow over the exhausted crew. Most of their systems were fried, but the thick-walled nuclear reactor, protected by layers of simple shielding, continued to provide basic power. "Status report," Miller called out, his voice hoarse. "Main power offline. Weapons offline. Life support running on backups." Kane paused. "But sir, the aliens. Their whole fleet. They're dead in space." Before Miller could respond, a weak transmission came through their backup radio. It was Admiral Peters, her voice filled with amazement. "Defiant, the reinforcements they were waiting for. They're retreating. Breaking orbit and running at full speed. Whatever you did, it worked." Miller looked around his bridge, at the smoking consoles and battle-weary crew. They had done it. The obsolete ship, the primitive technology, had saved Earth. "Send word to all ships," he ordered. "The old ways still have some fight left in them." As if in agreement, the Defiance reactor hummed steadily in the background, its simple, reliable power a reminder that sometimes the best technology isn't the newest. It's the one that gets the job done. The Defiant drifted in space, its hull scared and systems barely functioning. The electromagnetic pulse had worked better than anyone had expected, but it had also taken a heavy toll on the old ship. Emergency repair crews worked around the clock, trying to restore power to critical systems, while the disabled alien fleet floated nearby like dead sea creatures after a storm. Miller stood in engineering, watching Watson and her team work on the reactor. The massive nuclear core had survived the overload, protected by its simple but effective shielding, but many of the control systems were fried. "How bad is it?" he asked. Watson wiped grease from her hands with a rag. "Could be worse. The old analog backup systems are still working. We've got basic power and life support, but the main control computers are completely dead. Can we fix them? Given enough time, maybe. But..." She hesitated. "Sir, I've been thinking. Maybe we shouldn't." Miller raised an eyebrow. "Explain." "The aliens are still out there," Watson said, pointing to a simple radiation detector that showed the enemy fleet's position. "They're not dead, just disabled. Their quantum systems are probably repairing themselves right now. When they come back online, they'll be ready for our EMP trick. But if we can't repair our systems, we repair them differently," Watson interrupted, her eyes lighting up with excitement. "Look at what worked against them. Radar, nuclear power, analog controls. Everything simple, everything basic. What if we rebuilt the Defiant that way? Strip out all the complex computer systems and replace them with old-style controls. The idea was crazy. It went against every modern naval doctrine. But they had already proved that sometimes the old ways were better. How long would it take? With help from Earth? Maybe 48 hours. We've got enough spare parts in storage, and I know the ground crews have been raiding museums for old equipment since this started. Miller nodded slowly. Do it. I'll inform Admiral Peters. The next 2 days were a flurry of activity. Earth sent up shuttles carrying equipment that hadn't seen use in decades, analog radar displays, manual fire control systems, even old-style radio equipment. The Defiance bridge was transformed, modern touchscreens replaced with physical switches and dials. Kane spent hours learning to read the new radar displays, his fingers tracing patterns on the phosphorescent screen. It's amazing, he told Miller during a break. You can actually see things better this way. No computer interpretation, no filters. Just raw data. Walker had made his own discoveries. Their quantum fields leave traces we couldn't detect before, he explained, pointing to patterns on an oscilloscope. The simpler our detection methods, the more obvious their technology becomes. It's like they forgot that complex things are built on simple foundations. Even the weapons systems were modified. The remaining nuclear torpedoes were fitted with basic guidance systems, controlled by mechanical computers that couldn't be disrupted by quantum interference. Admiral Peters visited the ship personally to inspect the changes. She stood on the bridge, looking at the transformed command center with a mix of awe and disbelief. It looks like something from an old war movie, she said. Miller smiled. Sometimes the old ways are the best ways, Peters finished. Yes, I'm starting to believe that. She turned serious. But we have a problem. Long-range sensors show more alien ships approaching. A lot more. And this time, they'll be ready for us. How many? At least 50 vessels, all bigger than the ones we faced before. They'll be here in less than 6 hours. Miller looked around his modified bridge. The Defiant was stronger now in some ways, weaker in others. But they had learned something valuable. The aliens' greatest strength was also their greatest weakness. Their technology was too advanced, too dependent on perfect quantum coherence. They had no fallback systems, no simple backups. What about the rest of the fleet? He asked. 6 ships have been retrofitted with nuclear power, Peters replied. Not pretty, but they work. We've stripped them down like the Defiant, replaced complex systems with simple ones. They're ready to fight. Miller nodded. It wasn't much of a fleet, but it was better than fighting alone. And the alien ships we disabled? Still dead in space. We've managed to capture 2 of them. Our scientists are studying their technology, but it's like trying to understand a computer by looking at quantum mechanics. They skipped too many steps in their development. That gave Miller an idea. The captured ships, are their quantum fields still intact? Yes, just dormant. Why? Miller smiled. Because I think I know how we can even the odds. The plan came together quickly. The disabled alien ships were towed into position, their dormant quantum fields still detectable by the Defiant's simple sensors. Walker had discovered that these fields could be destabilized by specific frequencies of electromagnetic radiation, frequencies that a nuclear reactor could produce quite easily. Think of it like a tuning fork, he explained to the combined fleet crews. Hit the right frequency, and everything that resonates with it will vibrate. The aliens built their entire technology on quantum fields that all resonate at the same frequencies. If we can disrupt those frequencies, we can take down their whole fleet at once, Watson finished. It was a desperate plan, but those were the only kind they had left. The modified Earth ships took up positions around the captured alien vessels, their nuclear reactors humming with power. The Defiant would lead the attack, using its more powerful reactor to trigger the cascade. All ships report ready, Kane announced as the alien reinforcements approached. The new radar systems tracked them clearly, showing their attack formation. Remember, Miller said to his crew, they think they know what we can do now. They'll be expecting another EMP. We have to make them think that's still our only trick. The alien fleet arrived exactly as predicted, their ships moving with impossible grace. Their first transmission was short and arrogant. Your primitive weapons cannot harm us twice. Surrender and die quickly. Miller smiled grimly. Let's show them how primitive we can be. All ships, execute Battle Plan Delta. The Earth fleet moved forward, seemingly attempting to close range for another EMP attack. The aliens responded exactly as expected, spreading out to surround them, while staying just outside the estimated pulse range. They're in position, Walker reported, watching his oscilloscope. Quantum field resonance is strong. Miller took a deep breath. This would either work perfectly or fail spectacularly. Watson, begin reactor sequence. The Defiant's nuclear core spun up, but instead of building to an EMP burst, it produced a carefully calibrated frequency of radiation. The captured alien ships, positioned like giant tuning forks in space, began to resonate. Quantum field destabilization at 10%, Walker called out. 20%. 30%. The alien fleet realized something was wrong, but too late. Their quantum fields were already sensing with the captured ships, the resonance spreading like ripples in a pond. Field destabilization at 50%. The cascade is starting. Space itself seemed to shiver as the quantum fields began to collapse. Alien ships twisted and distorted, their impossible geometries failing as their fundamental technology betrayed them. 70%. 80%. Miller watched on his simple radar display as the enemy fleet began to break apart. Ships lost power, weapons failed, and their perfect formation dissolved into chaos. Quantum cascade complete, Walker announced finally. Their entire fleet, they're just empty shells now. The bridge erupted in cheers, but Miller kept his eyes on the radar. The aliens had thought their quantum technology made them invincible. They had never considered that their disregard for simple physics would be their downfall. Admiral Peters' voice came over the radio, filled with pride and amazement. Well done, Defiant. I think you've just changed the course of human history. Miller looked around his bridge, at the old-style displays and simple controls that had helped them defeat an enemy far more advanced than themselves. Sometimes, he realized, moving forward meant remembering what you learned in the past. All ships, he ordered, let's go home. I think Earth's fleet needs a complete redesign, and I have some ideas about keeping things simple. 5 years had passed since the alien fleet's defeat. The Defiant floated in its new home, a specially built dock at the Space Naval Museum. Its battle-scarred hull had been preserved exactly as it was after the final fight, a testament to humanity's triumph over advanced technology. Captain Miller, now Admiral Miller, stood at the observation window, watching a group of students tour his old ship. The young faces pressed against the viewing glass, eager to see the vessel that had changed the course of human history. Still can't stay away, can you? A familiar voice asked. Miller turned to find Watson walking toward him, her engineer's uniform now decorated with command insignia. Just making sure they're taking good care of her, he replied with a smile. How's the new fleet coming along? Better than anyone expected. Watson joined him at the window. The hybrid ships are performing perfectly. Nuclear power cores, analog backups for all critical systems, and just enough quantum tech to keep up with modern needs. Simple, reliable, and impossible for aliens to disable. The defeat of the alien fleet had revolutionized human spacecraft design. The new doctrine emphasized redundancy and simplicity, combining the best of old technology with carefully selected modern advances. Every ship now carried both quantum and nuclear power systems, advanced computers alongside mechanical backups. And the defense grid. Old-style radar stations covered the entire solar system, Watson said proudly. We can spot quantum signatures light hours away. Nothing's sneaking up on Earth again. They watched as the tour guide, a young officer, pointed out features of the Defiant to the students. The ship's simple design had become a model for military engineers across the world. Sometimes the best solution wasn't the most advanced one. Admiral Miller. The tour guide had spotted him. Would you mind speaking to the students? They're studying the Battle of Simple Victory. Miller raised an eyebrow at the name. Historians had a flair for dramatic titles, but he nodded and followed the guide to where 30 eager faces waited. Is it true the aliens never came back? One student asked immediately. They tried once, Miller replied. A small scout fleet appeared at the edge of the system 2 years ago. When our warning shots disrupted their quantum fields, they turned and ran. They learned their lesson about underestimating primitive technology. But why did their advanced technology fail? Another student asked. Weren't they smarter than us? Smart isn't always the same as wise, Miller said. They focused so much on advancing their technology that they forgot about the basics. Like building a house on sand, no matter how impressive the building, if the foundation isn't solid, it will fall. The students nodded, taking notes on simple paper notebooks. That was another change since the war. People had learned not to rely too heavily on complex technology. Computers were tools, not crutches. A soft beep from Watson's communicator interrupted the discussion. She checked it and turned to Miller with a serious expression. Sir, Fleet Command needs us. The deep space arrays picked up something. Miller excused himself from the students and followed Watson to the command center. Admiral Peters was waiting for them, studying a display that showed familiar quantum signatures at the edge of detection range. They're back, Miller asked. Not exactly. Peters brought up a recorded transmission. This arrived an hour ago. I think you'll want to hear it. The message played, translated from the alien language they had come to know well. To the defenders of Earth, we bring greetings and a request for dialogue. Our civilization has reconsidered its approach to technological development. Miller and Watson exchanged looks. They want to talk. More than that, Peters said. They want to learn. Apparently, their defeat here caused quite a stir back home. Their scientists started questioning their complete reliance on quantum technology. Now they want to understand how we created effective hybrid systems. They want to learn from us. Watson asked incredulously. The primitive species. Sometimes the student becomes the teacher, Miller said softly. What's the council's response? They're willing to open diplomatic channels, but they want the hero of the Battle of Simple Victory to lead the first contact team. Peters smiled at Miller, interested in being an ambassador. Miller looked out the window at the Defiant. The old ship had taught humanity a valuable lesson about the danger of abandoning proven technology in the rush for advancement. Now, perhaps, it could teach that lesson to others. On one condition, he said. We host the first meeting here, at the museum. Let them see where it all started. 3 months later, Miller stood in his dress uniform, watching the alien diplomatic vessel dock at the museum station. It was smaller than their warships had been, with none of the impossible geometries that had marked their previous ships. Instead, it showed signs of hybrid technology, quantum drives alongside conventional engines, complex sensors paired with simple backup systems. The alien ambassador emerged, its crystalline form catching the light. It approached Miller and performed a gesture that their cultural experts had identified as a sign of respect between equals. Admiral Miller, it said through a simple electronic translator. No quantum fields involved. My people once called yours primitive. We were wrong. True wisdom lies not in abandoning the past, but in building upon it. Welcome to Earth, Miller replied. I believe we have much to learn from each other. As they walked toward the museum, the ambassador's crystalline eyes fixed on the Defiant. The ship that changed everything, it said. We have stories about it now, you know. The primitive vessel that could not be defeated. The warrior that taught us humility. Miller smiled. She wasn't primitive. She was reliable. Sometimes that's more important than being advanced. The ambassador made a sound that the translator interpreted as agreement. My people have a saying now. The simplest foundation supports the tallest tower. We learned it from you. They reached the observation deck, where representatives from both species waited, humans and aliens, ready to share knowledge and learn from each other. And above them, the Defiant floated silently, its battle-scarred hull a reminder that sometimes the old ways were the best ways. Later that night, Miller returned to his favorite spot by the observation window. The alien ship glowed softly in the darkness, its hybrid systems a testament to how far both species had come. "You know," Watson said, joining him again, "they're calling her a legend now. Not bad for an obsolete ship they wanted to scrap." Miller watched as maintenance crews worked on the museum displays, preparing for the next day's tours. Future generations would come here to learn about the battle, about the importance of balance between old and new, about the danger of believing that newer always meant better. "She wasn't just a ship," he said finally. "She was a reminder. A reminder that sometimes the simple solution is the right solution. That wisdom doesn't always mean moving forward. Sometimes it means remembering where you came from." The Defiant's hull gleamed under the station's lights, its scars badges of honor now. They had called it obsolete, but it had become something more. It had become a legend, a teacher, and a bridge between two civilizations, learning to value both progress and tradition. The old ship had taught them all that true strength lies not in complexity, but in reliability. Not in being the most advanced, but in being the most dependable. It was a lesson that would guide humanity to the stars, not as conquerors or victims, but as teachers and students, always remembering that sometimes the old ways were the best ways.